Okay, well, welcome once again to Curiosity, Not Judgment. I'm Birga.
And I'm Gary.
And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you can clearly see that we've got a guest joining us today. For those of you just listening in, I want to introduce you to our new buddy, my new buddy, your old buddy, Bronson Taylor, who is a serial entrepreneur. And we wanted to include him on the conversation about things AI related and how AI may or may not be taking over our world. So Gary, why don't you give a few moments of introduction for how you two met and the connection that you have?
Sure. In my life, Birga, you've heard me tell the story that I was Phil's boy growing up, and now I'm just Mike's dad. I'm really nobody. But Bronson and I met through my son, Michael, and actually through my grandson, Riley, who was a member of Bronson's basketball team. So, and everything that Bronson does, and you'll hear about a little bit, he coaches youth basketball, which just is just elevates people in my book to no end, because giving back in that way and providing leadership to youth is something that we need even more of in this country today. So but anyway, that's how we met, and that's how he met my son. And after a couple of conversations, they literally started a company together. And so that's Bronson. You talk to him for more than 5 minutes and you come up with a world-changing idea, and then you go start a company. So that's how we met. And I know that Bronson has, in some of our recent communications, has been messing around with AI. So I thought, let's get a real world application of somebody who's in it on the program, just to talk, because other than the fact that we stayed in the Best Western last night, we don't know that much about it except for what we've read, and Bronson's living it.
And I have to tell you, that joke, I still don't understand it because it's from a generation.
It's a commercial. Yeah, it's a commercial.
Oh, Best Western joke. Anyway, welcome. We're so glad to have you, and I'm glad to meet you, at least digitally online here, and very curious to hear about some of your perspectives on AI, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I mean, me and Gary go back a little ways, and Birger, you're a new acquaintance, but it's awesome to be here. I went through some of your catalog this morning of your podcast, and you guys are having really interesting conversations, and I think it's the right conversations. And I like the way you all approach it. Curiosity, not judgment. We're trying to figure this out. I don't even know if the people creating AI are experts on AI. I mean, I think that what generative AI is doing is actually more impressive than they expected. And now they're recalibrating based on what it can actually do in the real world. So I think just having a curious mind as we approach AI is incredibly important right now. So good job for the platform that you both are creating.
Well, thank you. Take us back to some of the beginning steps of your introduction into AI and how it began to impact your entrepreneurialism. I always say that word incorrectly, but talk about how it impacted your building of your businesses.
Yeah, well, years ago, me and the people I worked with, we would throw around the word machine learning, and we would try to figure out, how can the data set grow because of what the machine is doing? How can it get better at what it's doing through these iterative cycles? We didn't really call it AI back then, but we were just playing with the ideas and trying to figure out what would a company look like if machine learning was at the core of it. Like a lot of people, I didn't do anything with that because it's really difficult to build a large language model. I mean, that's why it took 10 billion of investment from Microsoft for OpenAI to do what they did. It takes a lot of resources to be able to actually pull off some of the things that a lot of people were thinking about years ago. But then, like a lot of people, I believe it was in November of 2022, when they really released ChatGPT, it's like something inside my brain kind of broke. I mean, at first you're playing with it thinking it's Google, and you're asking it Google-like queries. And then after a few minutes or a few hours, you realize this is not Google Plus. This is something wholly different. I can have it write, snippets of code. I can have it outline things for me like an assistant would. I can ask it about, books and have them summarize. And then all of a sudden you think, well, wait, if it can do that, what else can it do? And so from November until now, I've been trying to find the edges of what ChatGPT 3.5 and now 4.0 can do. 3.5 was amazing. And then when they came out with 4.0, it's so much better. It's unbelievable. And so it's almost hard to imagine, like, what is 7.0 going to look like and what is it going to be capable of? Because I just think what generative AI can do is just unbelievable. So around November, it was playing and getting super interested just as a consumer, like everyone else, right? And then I slowly had this realization, all of my companies have to change. Like, this is the future. And so I'm involved in a lot of different endeavors. I'm involved in a lot of different industries. And I kind of just wrote down the names of my companies. I wrote down the industries I was in, and I started brainstorming and saying, you know what? AI is going to take over this industry. How is it going to do it? And how can I benefit from it instead of watching it happen? And so I'm kind of in the middle of that. I'm figuring out, what is AI going to do in these industries? And, to quote, Wayne Gretzky, how can I skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's already been? Gary is an investor in one of my companies, and he's watched this through investor updates, because we had a plan, and then I see AI and I realize my plan isn't very good. I need to go to where the puck is going. And so we started incorporating AI into that startup as quick as possible. So that's roughly at a high level what I'm trying to do, is not be behind the curve, because I think AI is going to take over everything.
And as it takes over, isn't it interesting that it kind of it's kind of taking over different parts of things at different times? So ironically, Microsoft has put $10 billion into ChatGPT, but I now have switched to writing some of my emails in Gmail. Why? Because Gmail has an add-on, a plugin that takes all of my emails and makes them better, right? And so why wouldn't I do that? And ironically, Outlook, a Microsoft project, doesn't. Now, obviously, things that are more, that have more, I don't want to say baggage, overhead, are going to be harder to switch to new things. So the things, it's going to be ironic. It's almost like in Africa, how people are skipping landlines and going straight to cell phones. The more nimble, the less old something is, it seems like they may be the ones who can take advantage of AI first. Am I reading that right?
I totally agree. I mean, I think it's going to follow a similar curve to software itself. So, Mark Andreessen, he came out, years ago, a famous venture capitalist, and he says, software is eating the world. And that's true. We've watched it eat industry after industry, but it eats industries in a certain order, right? The last industries to be eaten are government and healthcare and nonprofits, because they're slow to adapt. They're more of the laggards, on the adoption curve. There's just more bureaucracy. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, we might want more bureaucracy in government than in startups. That's probably what's keeping things on the rails. But it's still true that software is going to eat all those things, but at a slower rate. I think the same thing is true with AI. I think, healthcare, it's probably not first in line. I think that, education is probably not first in line. I think government offices are probably not first in line. They're going to wait and see what happens, and they're going to be really cautious, and then they're going to adopt it slowly. Where I think at the beginning of the line, one is startups, new initiatives. They have no baggage. They're going to try the new thing. But also, I would say anything in a creative field is going to be first. So you mentioned it, writing. I mean, what is AI profoundly good at currently? Writing. Right? Because it's a large language model, keyword language, right? I mean, we've had Wolfram Alpha for years, and that's kind of the mathematical equivalent of what ChatGPT is doing. And yet it's good at math, but it didn't really understand language. What ChatGPT does is it can take words, but here's what's really interesting, I think, and this is what Sam Altman will even say, is that he thinks what's interesting is it can go beyond what is and tell you what isn't. Right now, it's taking the large language model and it's making patterns and connections and regurgitating it in a way that is human readable. But I think eventually it's going to be able to find patterns we didn't know existed. I mean, think about it. When it has all of the data, it can go beyond words, and we can say, what is the correlation between X and Y? And it can start deducing, oh, the correlation is probably because it learned how to deduce from the large language model. So I think there's going to be an absolute curve. I think it's going to eat startups and creative industries first. Then I think it's going to do some really interesting, almost like correlative, future telling, insight-based things that we have a hard time doing ourselves. And then I think last will be the laggards, like always.
Now, okay, so to me, if E equals MC squared didn't exist yet, you set it loose on the world and tell it to come up with a theory of relativity. I get
Yeah.
that. Maybe it can solve fusion. How do you get it, though, to figure out the intuitive creative process? You mentioned that creativity and, art forms and language are first. How does it do the intuitive thing, the thing that we still think is uniquely human when it comes to these kinds of activities?
Yeah. So here's what's interesting is maybe some of those things aren't uniquely human. Maybe intuition is a process that can be copied, right? So I was actually thinking about this last week. You take someone like Einstein, you mentioned E equals MC squared, Einstein's famous formula, it's early 1900s. And, you know, why was it that he came up with that formula when he did? Well, he was a patent clerk, and a lot of the patents coming into his office were around time, because back then there wasn't standardized time, there wasn't GMT. They were trying to figure out how to not make the trains wreck literally into each other, and they needed some kind of time-telling device that was more accurate than sundials and the poor watches of the day. And so he's seeing patent after patent after patent come across his desk, and he's thinking about time, and then he's thinking about time and movement, and then he's thinking about time and movement and mirrors, and then he's thinking about time and space, and then he's wondering, can time be relative? But here's the thing, that was all a process. It wasn't that he just said, I see reality. It was that no, there was this input of time in the patents, and then there was him connecting dots of other industries, and then there was insights, but the insights were really the next best idea based on the inputs. And so the question is, if I can feed AI data and say, what are the insights? Maybe having insights is not a spark of brilliance, but going through a procedure, going through an algorithm to see if there's some truth at the end that we don't know at the beginning. That's a maybe.
Love that. Love that.
Oh, you have opened a can of worms, I tell you. I do want to go back to a statement that you made earlier, though, and have you walk through some practicality. And you mentioned something along the lines of that AI would first be most critical or most impactful on startups. So let's say we've got somebody listening, or a few somebody's listening to this episode, getting ready to open a donut shop or a laundromat or a computer service center. How do they ask curious questions around AI with the assumption that it's going to drastically impact their ability to do business? How do they get ahead of the curve on this?
Yeah. So you named industries where, although they're startups in a traditional brick and mortar sense, I don't know if they'd be startups in the high tech, high growth sense. So let's take a donut shop, for instance, right? That's not what I would call a high growth startup, which is what I usually mean by startup. So the first thing you might ask as a donut shop is, how quickly will it affect me? And with that example, I think you're okay for now,
Okay.
right? Because there's just the physical world is involved, right? And so the more the physical world is involved, the less AI can do it right now well, right? Where as soon as you get into the worlds of ones and zeros, then AI is better equipped right now. But even with that, let's take the donut shop, because it is a hard example. So if we can learn from it, it's easier to learn from any other example. So one, the process of making a donut could be easily done by a robot, right? And so, not technically AI, but still robotics. And so is there a robot donut AI? Yes, that's easy to imagine. Can that robot produce more donuts at a higher quality with less inefficiencies and less waste than something else? Yes. Okay. So now we have the production mechanism. What about square footage? It requires much less square footage. Okay. Now we're reducing our rent cost. Okay. Well, how does it know what donuts to make? It's no longer guessing. It's looking at the past 12 months of data, and it's saying, we don't know why, but every July, these donuts sell. And so I'm going to make X amount more of them. So let me give you an example from the real world. Walmart, years ago, they wanted to know what to stock and when. So they started playing with big data, and they couldn't explain it. But for some reason, certain times of year in Florida, they sold a lot more Pop-Tarts. And they were like, what is the correlation? Like, they just didn't understand. And then they looked into it further and further. It was hurricane season, and that was a non-perishable food that didn't taste terrible, right? It wasn't canned beans, it was a Pop-Tart. And if you want a somewhat non-perishable food, Pop-Tarts is an easy go-to when you're expecting a hurricane. And so they said, oh, we see it. But here's the thing. Walmart had to see the connection before they were willing to, okay, let's stock. The robot says, I don't care what the connection is. I see it in the data. I'm going to produce that amount of donuts. And for whatever reason, they're going to sell. And I don't ever need to know why. It doesn't matter. I see the correlation. So I think production could be robotic. I think what to produce could be based on a large, data set of those things. And even price elasticity and what to charge could be done using big data instead of some CEO guessing how much that frosted donut should cost. So I would just almost look at every aspect of a business and ask individually, how can it be impacted? So it's not that a donut shop is being disrupted. It's that the production is being disrupted. The pricing is being disrupted. It's the manufacturing processes, knowing what to make is being disrupted. The human touch element of selling it might be disrupted. It's like, take apart a business into its million constituent aspects and then ask, how does AI affect it? And then put it all back together. That's how I would approach it.
All right. So then if we take yet another step back and before startup even happens, whether it be a tech hybrid company, whether it be a brick and mortar building, are there some opportunities to question AI to even see before you spend the money, before you spend the time, is this a viable option? Is this a business worth launching? And is this going to be something that's ultimately going to be beneficial to myself and employees and my community?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say the rubric that you're asking for is not just valid in this new era and in the AI world. That's a valid rubric, period. So let me give you an example. Should I start a business that's AI based? Well, do you have the expertise? That's one question you have to ask yourself. Like, just because you like the idea of an industry doesn't mean you have the chops to do it. It might be a great business for someone else with their expertise, but a bad business for you with your expertise. So you have to ask, one, do you have the expertise to play in that world? Two, do you have the resources, right? I mentioned that I was on to machine learning years ago, but I didn't have the resources to play that game. And so it wasn't a good business for me back then. But now I can tap into APIs for $20 a month or $50 a month that took billions to actually develop and do the R&D of. So I'm the beneficiary of not having to start the business, which I couldn't have anyway. I didn't have the resources to do so, right? Do you have the desire? Right. And this is true with any business you might start. If you don't like AI, then don't start a business based on AI. Go do something else. Because I actually think there's a world where AI is going to be so all-consuming, there's going to be a cottage industry of businesses that revolt against AI and find a niche and grow. Right. Yep. I mean, some of the things that AI can't do, like it can't build a fire with your kids and give them memories. Like it can't, there's just, the list goes on and on of these human connections that actually matter. And if you can create an experience for an individual, for a family, for some kind of tribe in the world, I don't know if AI can ever touch that. Like experiences might be immune in some sense. And so I would go through the rubric of, are you any good at it? Do you have the money? Do you have the desire? And does the world need it, right? You mentioned this already, but if it's going to hurt humanity, let's steer away from it. If it's going to help, let's go toward it. But there's some version of that rubric that I would be playing with in my head.
Yeah, the book I just recently read on Blinkist was the author basically came out and said, look, we need to stop thinking about AI as the fastest or most intelligent machine learning model, et cetera, but more the paradigm of the most beneficial. And doing that through making sure that it takes human preferences into account and even human behaviors to check human preferences, because we sometimes don't articulate what we want ourselves someday. And you talked about the donut shop. I'd love to talk even more later about maybe the high-tech business and things like that, and what you've described about a VC due diligence of kind of is this company worth starting? But one of the things that you touched on, I always say it's the psychology. It's never the technology. It's always the psychology. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned a kind of a range of companies and entities, ending with government, which is always the last in line. there's going to be some naysayers out there, and there's going to be some people saying this is no good. Remember what happened to autonomous driving with the poor driverless Uber that hit the woman in Phoenix and set autonomous driving back 5 years probably. What's that going to be like for AI, do you think?
Yeah. So here's the thing is, this is what people have always said about all technology. So let me give you an example that most people don't bring up. When books were first becoming mass published and you could buy a book of fiction and read it in your home. Nowadays, when a parent sees their kid reading, they're like, yes, we won. Our kids are reading. This is amazing. They're going to be brilliant. When it first happened, psychologists were coming out and saying, this is going to rot their minds. They're being lost in these invisible worlds, and they're not interacting with any of their friends. They're not going outside and playing. They are literally doing something that is so navel gazing and so independent and so fantasy based that this cannot be good for their soul. And then eventually we realize they're fine and books are fine and reading a fiction book is fine. But then that happens with literally everything. The internet itself comes out. It's terrible, except when it isn't. Self-driving cars. So yes, it killed a woman. How many people has it saved because it drives better than humans? I mean, that's the thing is, like, we don't like to do these kinds of calculus because it's making us play the role of God in a way, and we don't like it. We don't like saying, yes, that life was lost, but these were gained, therefore it's worth it. We would rather make no decision as a people, but kill more people because it makes us feel safe. We don't like it when we actually intervene with technology that saves people and destroys some, because now we have an active role, even though the active role was a net positive. Because we act on our own volition, we feel like God and the burden is too much. So a lot of people would rather make no decision, but actually hurt more people. And I don't agree with that. I think let's interject, let's make a hard decision, let's actively hurt some people, but save many more, right? That's the way we have to approach it if we're being rational. Otherwise, we're hurting people with our apathy, which is still hurting people. A non-decision is still a decision to do nothing. And if doing nothing hurts people, then you made the decision to hurt people. But we don't connect the dots that clearly, and therefore we feel like we can sleep better at night, but I don't see why we should, right? So all that to say, we have to make AI work for us and do more good than ill. So for instance, we should put some parameters in place. I don't think we should train a large language model on the internet itself, right? I think it should always be a whitelist of resources we feed it. And there's a couple reasons for that. If you unleash a machine learning algorithm on a large language model on the internet itself, garbage in, garbage out, you're going to get a lot of racism. You're going to get a lot of hate. You're going to get a lot of evil. And it's going to train itself on the best and the worst of humankind, when we could have just fed it the best of humankind. So if you unleash it on all of data, that's not the best we can do. Let's unleash it on a data set that is in the control, that either through a democratic control or through some kind of control that isn't just unleashing it on everything. Secondarily, there should be certain systems that have an air gap between itself and AI, right? So the nuclear systems should always have an air gap between AI and what could detonate a nuclear bomb. Otherwise, there's a connective tissue that's possible, even if it isn't probable. So we need to have the computers that run the things that could kill us all to not be connected to the machines that are learning at a rate that we may not understand. So I think having the model trained the way we choose, I think having an air gap in certain things. And then some people have even mentioned not teaching it to program, not teaching it to actually write its own code. But that's what's funny is, like, AI doesn't really know anything. That's what's really funny about the conversation around AI. It knows, like, for instance, if you go to ChatGPT, you ever notice it just puts the next word, and then it puts the next word, and then it puts the next word? It's not holistically planning anything. It's just saying, what's the right next word based on everything that has come before in the dialogue with the user and in the words I've written. It is always doing the computation of what is the next right word. It's never thinking, this is what my aim is. This is what my intention is. This is what my philosophy is. It's never actually building and creating in the human sense. It's always just filling in the blank with the next word in a way that is profoundly like a human without getting there in any way like a human would, right? So those are some of the ways that I would think about AI and how to get the best out of it instead of the worst out of it.
Amazing. I know we're right at time and we're going to have to wrap up this episode. Maybe we can get you to do one more follow-up here, but for now, I think we'll sign off. I will point people in your direction, though, if they want to carry on the conversation with you online. So the website for Bronson, D-U-M-B, punk.com is a good way to reach him. And of course, for Gary and I, you can check us out at curiositynotjudgment.com. Bronson, so thankful for this beginning part of this conversation. We trust that much more is to come.
Thank you all.
Bronson. Good seeing you. Take care, everyone.
Good to see you.